If you rely on any kind of assistance right now, food help, housing support, childcare, energy assistance, or cash benefits, you need to slow down for a moment and really listen to this. Because something big is being discussed behind the scenes in Washington, and if it moves forward, it could quietly reshape how help works in America. Not next year, not decades from now, but much sooner than most people realize. On paper, it's being described as reform, as modernization, as a smarter, more flexible system that helps people climb out of poverty instead of getting stuck in it. But buried inside that language are changes that could completely alter who gets help, how long they get it, and whether that help is guaranteed at all. Today, I want to walk you through what this proposal is, why some lawmakers say it's a solution, and why many advocates are deeply worried it could end up hurting the very people it claims to help. This is not about panic. It's about understanding what's being proposed before it becomes reality, because once systems like this are changed, they are rarely changed back. Right now, most public assistance programs in the United States operate separately. Food assistance has its own rules. Housing assistance has its own rules. Childcare, energy help, cash aid, each one has different eligibility limits, different applications, different renewal schedules. If you've ever tried to apply for more than one program at the same time, you already know how confusing and exhausting that process can be. Different offices, different paperwork, different deadlines. And yes, that system is far from perfect. Lawmakers behind the new proposal argue that this patchwork approach is outdated. They say it traps families in bureaucratic loops instead of helping them move forward. Their answer is something called a consolidated mobility grant model. The idea is simple on the surface. Instead of funding programs like SNAP, housing vouchers, childcare subsidies, and energy assistance separately, states would be allowed to combine large portions of that money into a single funding pool. From there, states could design their own systems, their own eligibility rules, their own benefit structures. Supporters say this would allow help to work together instead of against itself. They argue it could reduce benefit cliffs, eliminate duplication, and make it easier for people to increase their income without suddenly losing everything. And that's where many people nod along, because benefit cliffs are real. A small raise, a few extra hours at work, and suddenly food assistance drops off. Housing help disappears. Childcare costs explode. In some cases, earning a little more can leave families worse off than before. That problem is real, and it deserves solutions. But here's where the proposal starts to get complicated, because to give states this flexibility, the plan removes many of the federal rules that currently protect benefit recipients. Instead of guaranteed eligibility, funding would become capped. Instead of national standards, states would be allowed to set their own definitions of need and success. And history tells us that when federal oversight disappears, outcomes can vary wildly depending on where you live. One of the biggest shifts in this proposal is the move away from entitlement-style assistance. Right now, programs like SNAP work on a basic promise. If you qualify, the help is there. It doesn't matter how many other people need assistance at the same time. It doesn't matter whether the state budget is tight that year. Eligibility equals access. Under a consolidated grant system, that guarantee can disappear. When funding is capped, states must decide how to distribute limited resources. That often means waiting lists, cut-offs, tighter rules. You could meet every requirement and still be told there's no funding left. We've already seen this with housing assistance. Millions of eligible families wait years for vouchers that may never come. Not because they don't qualify, but because funding runs out. Applying that same structure to food assistance would be a major shift. And for families already living close to the edge, even short gaps in help can have serious consequences. Another concern is what happens when everything is bundled together. Today, benefits are somewhat compartmentalized. If there's a paperwork issue with one program, Others may continue uninterrupted, but under a single consolidated system, everything could be tied to one file, one missed deadline, one documentation problem, one administrative error, and suddenly multiple forms of assistance could be affected at once. Instead of several safety nets, you're left with one, and if that one fails, there's nothing underneath it. The proposal does include limited emergency exceptions, things like natural disasters or public health crises, but everyday disruptions, job instability, transportation problems, health issues that don't qualify as emergencies, those grey areas are where families often fall through the cracks. Work requirements are another major piece of this discussion. Supporters argue that encouraging employment is essential for upward mobility. And in theory, tying benefits to work can make sense when jobs are available, accessible, and compatible with family realities. But when work requirements expand across multiple programs at once, the risks increase. Food assistance already has work rules in many cases. Housing assistance generally does not. Under a consolidated model, states could choose to apply work standards across the board. That means a problem at work wouldn't just affect grocery money, it could affect housing stability too, for seniors, for people with disabilities, for caregivers. Even when exemptions exist on paper, navigating them in practice can be difficult, and when states are rewarded for reducing spending, there is an incentive to tighten rules rather than expand flexibility. That incentive structure is one of the most controversial parts of the proposal. Under the plan, if a state spends less money than expected, it can retain the savings. Those funds could be placed into reserve accounts or redirected to other state priorities. Supporters say this encourages efficiency. Critics say it encourages exclusion. Because the fastest way to save money isn't helping people succeed. It's limiting who qualifies in the first place, adding paperwork, shortening eligibility periods, raising thresholds just enough to push people out. We've seen this dynamic before. In the mid-1990s, cash assistance was converted into a block grant system. The stated goal was reducing dependency and promoting work. What happened instead was a dramatic decline in the number of families receiving direct aid, without a corresponding drop in poverty. States used funds for a wide range of purposes, many unrelated to direct assistance, and once spending dropped, it rarely returned to previous levels. The lesson wasn't that help worked better, it was that fewer people received it. Supporters of the new proposal argue that safeguards are in place. States would be required to conduct evaluations, civil rights protections would remain, basic health and safety standards could not be waived. Those are important safeguards. But evaluations are retrospective. They measure outcomes after policies have already affected real families. And protections on paper do not always translate into protections in practice, especially when systems become more complex. If benefits are reduced or delayed during the experiment, families don't get that time back. Missed meals, lost housing, interrupted childcare, those costs are immediate. It's also important to understand that this proposal would begin as a pilot. Only a limited number of states would participate at first. Participation would be voluntary. That sounds reassuring. But pilots often become models. If outcomes are framed as successful, based on metrics chosen by the state, pressure builds to expand the approach. And what qualifies as success matters. Is success measured by employment numbers, by budget savings, by reduced enrollment, or by actual improvements in household stability? Those definitions shape policy outcomes. So what does this mean for you right now? First, nothing has changed yet. This is a proposal, not a law. No benefits are being cut today because of this. But awareness matters, because once discussions like this move forward quietly, changes can happen with very little public input. Understanding the trade-offs is key. Fixing benefit cliffs is important. Reducing administrative burdens is important. but flexibility without accountability has consequences, and history suggests that the people with the least political power often bear the cost of experimentation. There are constructive paths forward: gradual benefit phase-outs, national standards with state innovation within guardrails, improved coordination without capped funding. These ideas exist. The question is which path policymakers choose, and whether people affected by these decisions are part of the conversation or simply the data points afterward. If you want to stay informed, track legislative movement carefully, watch committee actions, read summaries from multiple perspectives, and don't be afraid to speak up. Supporting reform does not require supporting risk without safeguards. You can want a system that helps people move forward and protects them from falling through the cracks. Those goals are not opposites. As always, information is your strongest tool. Change doesn't always arrive with headlines. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in procedural language and pilot programs, and by the time the impact is visible, the framework is already in place. Stay aware, ask questions, and make sure that any system built in the name of opportunity doesn't quietly remove the security people rely on to survive.